All right.
Do you want to launch us into the first thing?
Yeah. We'll leave the comments about the troll where they are. If you wanna go in the comments and read them yourself and troll back, by all means, enjoy. I
Yeah.
have
And
at it. I think if you are
if
willing to
you're
put
out
your
there,
voice
our
out there on
dear
the internet,
friend,
like
please.
you are opening yourself up to whatever, which actually perfectly leads us into this discussion about baseball and Fernando Tatis Jr. So I'm gonna just play the clip of what happened, and then
did
we'll.
you did you see Scotty?
Did someone call for a troll? Well, sometimes a particular set of skills are required, my friend. Um, by all means, have at it. Let's
Oh
see if
man,
this
this
works
guy.
because this will be pretty dope if it does.
Yeah.
Um, awesome. All right. So recently, in the wonderful world of sports and baseball, um, there is this phenomenal young player by the name of Fernando Tatis Jr. Plays for the San Diego Padres. Um, Absolutely killing it in the league right now, leading in a lot of the major categories. Now, the Padres were beating, I believe it was the Rangers. They were
The
up about
Rangers.
7 runs in the eighth inning. Tatis was up 3-0 in the count, right? That's a hitter's count. It's a field day as far as anybody's concerned, right? At least in my perspective. When you're ahead in the count, you get to do whatever the fuck you want because it's the pitcher's at bat to lose. Now, this proceeds to ensue.
Up in the pen right now. This is in
Oh,
the air to right field. Back it goes. Nendo has done it again. Fernando Tatis Jr. a grand slam, and the Padres go
Is
on
it
top,
playing on your end?
14-3. Two
My
home
stream's just
runs,
catching up.
7 RBIs for Fernando Tatis Jr.
Corey, you keep joking about doxing. I'm gonna dox you. No, I would never. I don't believe in
You
that
just
charge.
use this
Unbelievable.
government, so you're like 30%.
I mean,
First grand slam
if
for
you signed
Fernando
up for anything,
Tatis Jr.
your
And that
government's
one
out
he's
there.
thrown behind Machado, but it slipped. Yeah, I guess.
All right, right. So Tatis hits an absolute monster of a grand slam on a 3-0 pitch. Glorious, truly beautiful. And then the next batter up, immediately after him, pitcher throws it in the general vicinity of said batter, right behind them just a little bit. An intentional maneuver. And this is where the bullshit starts. Because right after the grand slam gets hit, the Rangers manager's pissed off. He's just like, this asshole. And then the pitcher does what he does. And then after the game, the Padres manager also suggests that Tatis did the wrong thing. He's like, he ignored the sign to take the pitch. At 3-0, we gave him the sign, you take that strike, right? You take the pitch, whatever it's going to be, wherever it is. Just let it happen. And this led to baseball blowing up. Why? Because this is a debate that we've been having for a very long time. I love baseball. I'm one of those weird people who can sit and watch every baseball game all season long. I was depressed when the season got cut this year because I commit to 162 games. Like, that is my life. I know it makes me weird, right? I also watch golf and F1 now. I don't know what the fuck happened to me. But
Uh-oh.
people have been complaining that baseball has changed, right? Like now, I remember growing up in the days of Ken Griffey Jr., right, and Sosa and McGuire, and like the long ball was like a special treat, right? Like it was a difficult time to be a hitter in baseball. It's still a difficult time to be a hitter in baseball. The difference now is that you're either striking out or that ball's dead. There's no in between. And I feel like a lot of people who are active viewers of the sport will agree with that. But the debate now is about this kind of like hidden minutia behind how baseball is played, right? They're supposed to be kind of indoctrinated into the culture of the sport and conditioned to play the game a certain way with certain levels of respectability that come with the territory, right? And I don't know who or where or why these rules ever originated, and taking the 3-0 pitch is just one of many, which PJ thankfully wrote me an expose about some of the other ones that we'll get to in a moment here. But I gotta say, me personally, I take a huge issue with this. That someone would be upset that one of the best hitters in the league wants to play the best he can. And something that was brought up in PJ's comments was like, listen, in baseball, the game is never over until it's actually over. Like there have
Right.
been absurd comebacks in the game of baseball. I believe
There's no time.
the statistic, yeah, there's no time, right? And I believe the statistic I saw earlier today was like, you know, before he hit that Grandy, their win percentage was a 99.6, right? Which isn't 100. Yes, it's fucking close, but it's still not 100, right? Because there's still an entire inning and a half left, which you can lose the game in.
And didn't the Rangers make like a huge comeback?
They scored a handful of runs, but they still ended up losing, I think, 14-4. It wasn't good, or
Okay.
some shit like that. It was pretty awful.
Mhm.
But it doesn't change the fact that like you can lose that game. I've seen it happen,
Sure.
in other baseball games, right? And because there's no time, right, that possibility is always there as long as people are getting their hits, playing smart, playing aggressively, doing what have you, right? So this bullshit about taking a pitch to not hurt the pitcher's feelings drove me absolutely up the fucking wall, because that is not how the sport should be taught or played, right? Like if I had kids right now who were playing baseball, softball, whatever, and I had to explain to them what was going on, they'd be like, if you are ever the hitter in a 3-0 count, you crush that ball. I don't give a fuck who was on the other side of that pitch. I don't care whose parents are watching. None of it. My wife gets mad at me because she's like, listen, you can't be that parent. All right? You can't be at our kids' baseball games causing problems. I'm like, I'm going to be that asshole, because there's nothing wrong with playing to the best of your ability, right? Like, if the pitcher doesn't want you to hit a 3-0 pitch, throw a better pitch. Them's the breaks. Just be better. Um, and, when I brought it up to you, I think my big issue with it is, like, can you think of another sport where this is an expectation that someone would have of you, where you're beating up on somebody, and they're just like, can you just, like, not real quick?
No, I can't. And my thing is, I think there's a set of unique factors to baseball as a sport that I think make all of this really weird. So one, baseball is a sport of failure, right? You hit the ball 3 times out of 10 and you're fucking stuck, right? In any other context, a 30% is a fucking fail,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, if my takedown percent, and I'm a wrestling coach, if my takedown percentage was a 30%, I wouldn't make a roster anywhere, right? It's an abysmal statistic. Um, and so there's that. There's also the fact that like it's a sport where the defense has the ball, right? And you step to that at bat as an individual. And I'm a big believer that like most sports are team sports. Baseball's a team sport. Wrestling's a team sport. But your at bat, I think, is your opportunity for individual achievement. Individual achievement. And in a sport like lacrosse, another sport that I've played, if we're concerned about running up the score, we just don't shoot the rock, right? We don't shoot the rock. But I wouldn't tell a teammate or a kid I'm coaching to turn over the ball, right? Or I wouldn't ask them to take an unnecessary body check in the name of like soothing the feelings of the opposing players. I would never ever do that, right? And the other thing too that pissed me off was one of Tatis's teammates, I guess, goes out at first or some shit, and then he looks at the other bench and says, "I'll talk to him. I'll talk to him." What? It's ridiculous to me, right? It's paramount to like, and again, to use like lacrosse, right? If you catch a body, 2 hands to the chest, and you plant him, clean hit, but savage as fuck, I might help the other guy up because he just took a huge hit, but I'm not gonna talk to the bench, to their coach, and be like, I'll talk to Marcus. I'll talk to Marcus. He doesn't need a body count right now. It's nuts.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense to me. And wrestling is similar to baseball in that it's very much a team sport. You're only as good as the kids in your wrestling room. But when you step to that stripe, there are no timeouts. It is you and one other individual. And it's and one of the things that I really love about wrestling is that it's the only combat sport practiced in high school. And it's a sport that is powerfully exposing. In a way that I don't think that very many young people. It takes a particular kind of young person to wrestle, and I don't know that everybody has the mental fortitude for that. I think I can teach anybody to wrestle. I don't know that I can teach everybody to have the intestinal fortitude for that moment where you step to the stripe and you got to scrap for 6 minutes. And my wrestling mentors, and I've had excellent mentors. Jay Farrell and Tim Lewis and Jimmy Mosteller, of course, if you know my life, my personal life, of course, come to the forefront. They always made it very clear: you wrestle to your level, right? So if you can dunk a kid, you dunk a kid, right? There, and to be clear, right? Like if I can overwhelm an opponent in 30 seconds, the sportsmanlike thing to do is to dispatch that opponent quickly, right? What we don't like is the kid who showboats, who's stuffing a kid into the mat,
Yep.
who's just running a takedown clinic to get the tech fall, right? If you can overwhelm an opponent that quickly, you wrap them up, you pin them, you move on to the next match. You don't risk injury, you don't risk humiliating this person, and you move on. But never would I tell a wrestler to take a takedown. I mean, it's absurd.
Yeah.
Right. It's. I mean, it's laughable to me. Like I'm even struggling to articulate it. Like telling one of my kids, "Hey, you know what? Let him get some back points in the next period." Where do they do that at?
Yep.
It's nuts. It's absolutely nuts. And in baseball, hitting is already so hard, right? In the majors, hitting is so hard, and I don't understand. And I say this as a cultural outsider as well as like a marginal fan. Like I casually enjoy playoff baseball, and I recognize that every sport has its own culture and its own unwritten rules. Baseball's not the only one.
Mm-hmm.
Wrestling is the only sport where you can like, you'll concede team points for taking your straps down before you've left the mat. Like wrestling has its own bullshit too. I just cannot imagine chastising a teammate or a kid you are coaching for doing their job when the other team, right? Because this is the other piece too that fucking irks me is the Rangers weren't going to stop looking to score themselves, right? You know what I'm saying? It's not like, okay, well, they've pumped the brakes, so we're going to pump the brakes. And this is just, we're going to play out the last inning and a half, and this is what it is. It's going to stay 10-4, and that's whatever. No, they're going to try and rally. So what are we telling, right? The Padres have to pump the brakes to let them get within a particular distance, at which point it's then acceptable for them to score again? It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
There's no other, like athletic context that I know of personally or have participated in where there are any rules akin to that.
Yeah, baseball doesn't have a major or minor decision. Doesn't have a tech fault. Doesn't have any of these things that wrestling has that change the dynamic of scoring and how much your team's gonna win by, right? And it's like, oh, you're absolutely, first 6 guys on the mat got just pinned flat. This guy's gonna lose by a minor, and coach is like, the difference between a major and a minor is gonna be a couple things. Maybe give him 1 or 2 escapes. Just let him up, so that it doesn't feel as bad. Like you'd be like, no, I'm gonna body this person and get the fuck out of here because I'm better, right? And Aries makes a good point about reserving energy and injuries. The only reasons you might like play a little bit differently, but baseball doesn't have time constraints, right? Like they added shot clocks to lacrosse to speed up the game. They're doing everything they can to speed up baseball. Every change that they've made is to make the game go faster, because it takes for fucking ever. Like again, as somebody who watches the games all the time, they take a long time, and I love the changes to the rules to speed people up. The number of mound visits are limited. The number of times that pitchers have to face batters before they can change pitchers. So there's none of this like you face one guy and then we swap. Like, to change both the strategy and the pace of the game to make it more competitive, right? Like you have to be a good relief pitcher. You can't just be a one-off. Like I got the one left-handed batter out and I'm good, right? Like you got to be able to compete. And I other sports aren't like that, and it's very confusing to me that baseball is like, and basketball has that unwritten rules too. Like Lauren and I were just joking the other day, about the fact that the by the time you get to the last 2 to 5 minutes of a basketball game, that takes half an hour,
so 20 minutes,
easy, right? It's the longest part of the game, and I'm like, this is craziness. It's absolutely absurd. And it's one of those things that's like, it's just understood. We're gonna foul. We're gonna shoot free throws. We're gonna play this way, and that's how the game is going to go down for the next 2 minutes, right? It's gonna slow everything down intentionally, because playing regular competitive basketball when there's like a 7-point differential on both sides doesn't work for people in that space, right? in hockey when they pull the goalie, it's not the same, right? You're not gonna be like, oh, they pulled their goalie, we should like ease up on the offense. And
Mhm.
whenever we're clearing the puck down ice, like we shouldn't aim towards the net, right? Like no, if it goes in the net, it goes in the net. Like you pulled your goalie, those are
Yeah.
mistakes that are going to happen, right?
Yeah.
And so
And
it's pretty concerning that this happens. And I was gonna make a mercy rule, right? That would be interesting. So the comparison I was gonna make that brings it around to gaming, which is interesting, is that recently, I think right before the summer showdown ended, the Shock were putting on a fucking show, just bodying teams left and right. And I think they were
yeah,
playing against the Uprising
best team
in
in
the
the
next
league.
game, and they were like, what would be fun if we let Super play DPS. Super's been joking on Twitter about how great of a Genji he is, and so for their series against the Uprising, who are really bad, they let Super play DPS, and he absolutely shredded them. And then that day, everyone was like, that was super fucked up that you guys let your tank player play DPS and do that to a team that's struggling. And
Yeah.
I don't really see the problem with it. Like, they needed to figure out how to dominate the fact that a tank player was playing DPS and maybe figure out that
Yeah.
you can kind of body that. But the fact of the matter was that he's just mechanically better, so they still won.
Yeah. And I think there's two things. I think a lot of those unwritten rules, particularly around like how you show empathy and compassion for your opponent, um, I think they matter, right? I want to be clear, and I don't think that that's what we're advocating for here. But there is, like, when we're talking about Major League, we're not talking about Pop Warner football. We're not talking about Pee Wee
Mm-hmm.
baseball, right? Like, we're talking about major league players where people are cashing in tens of millions of dollars to play this game at the highest level. I can't wrap my mind around how you, one of the most elite. I mean, you might be trash within the league, right? And again, I don't know who that pitcher was. I don't know anything about him at all. You can be trash within the league and still be literally within the top 1%, right, of all baseball players on the planet. I cannot fathom how your ego is so fragile that getting dunked on in a game, it feels earth shattering. So earth shattering that your reliever then has to, you know, catch a guy between the numbers. Um, and I'll say too that, like, in terms of like sports in general, everything can't be a barn burner. I think blowouts are good. They're good for sports. In as much as I love watching like the John Jones versus Alexander Gustafsson, the first fight, it was ridiculous. I mean, it was a bloodbath, and it was 5 rounds, and you're just sitting there like, oh shit, like who won this fight, right? That's a particular experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about like Jorge Masvidal putting a knee between Ben Askren's eyes in Ben Askren's second UFC fight ever and retiring him and putting this kid out like asleep in 11 seconds. That's also good for sport. That's good for growing the business, for attracting viewership. And so, like, does it suck to be that pitcher? Yeah, I bet. I bet. I've been thrown for 5 in the first period
Mm-hmm.
of a wrestling match, and that sucks. But I conceded 5.
Yeah.
I conceded. I created that, right?
Yeah.
And it is what it is, and it's incumbent upon me to learn how to deal with that situation. I don't then throw a tantrum after the fact, and as a coach, I don't get mad at the kid who dunks my kid, right? I get mad at my kid, and I don't get mad at my kid when they dunk somebody else. I get mad when my kid gets dunked and then doesn't have the integrity and the self-control to compose himself, to shake his opponent's hand, and to shake the opposing coach's hand. That's when I go to the other coach and say, hey, I'll catch him and I'll go talk to him. And I'll make sure that my kid goes back and apologizes to the opposing coach, to his opponent, to the official or what have you, and makes right and operates with good sportsmanship. But I don't make my kids apologize for pinning kids in the first period.
Yeah, Hogan brings up this point about respect, and I think that's the place where this problem gets iffy for people who are like, it was a respect thing, and he they didn't go about it the right way, like not taking that pitch versus throwing at the next batter up. Like, if you take somebody deep on a 3-0 pitch, right? Like, are they gonna be mad? Sure. Are you going to be happy? Of course. Should you expect that person's going to be upset? Yeah. And if somebody is going to go after you versus like your 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 next teammate, like those are two different things. At least for me. Um, right? Like, and that's why the respect issue is a complicated one for me because like in PJ's comments he brought up the bat flips, right? Or touchdown dances in football. They're similar, right? Like if you crush a ball and you want to get fancy with, like if you ever watch Korean baseball, their bat flips are incredible. They do cinematic things with their bats when they hit home runs. It's beautiful. I've watched highlight reels of Korean batters, and it's like the bat flip is dope. Like let you celebrate for doing something that is,
Right.
hard to do, and is an accomplishment in the way the game is played. Right? It is a stat that matters.
Yeah.
If you want to celebrate. There is a problem then, like and PJ wrote this down where you celebrate like when your team is getting bodied, right? Like PJ was like, teams doing fully choreographed touchdown dances when you're down, like 30 points.
14.
That's not the hot. Like what's wrong with you? Just
Mm-hmm.
keep it moving until it's a little more competitive. Or the sliding into the second baseman, to break up a double play, right? Like when people get mad about that, I'm like, you got to be joking me. The person's doing something competitive. Their intention is to try and keep you from making that play, as long as they're not trying to hurt you.
Yeah.
Right, but they're sliding strategically with purpose, without putting a spike in somebody's leg, right? Like that's fine by me. There's no need to fight or bitch or moan about that play. That is a heads up play that should be getting made, right?
Yeah.
And so these issues of like being respectful and stuff, like literally the other day, the clip from Warzone the other day when I bodied that squad and I gave the last guy the bags, right? Like people get mad about teabagging. The Overwatch League fines players for teabagging. It happened a long time ago. I'm pretty sure it was Birdring who teabagged somebody in a game and they fined him.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, come on, like gamers know what it is. Like the bags are gonna happen. Just let it be.
Yeah.
Like if you got bodied, understand that it happened. Getting bodied, losing by a lot, getting handled is good for you. We talked about this. There was that video that God, what's the name of that YouTube channel? The one that like breaks down like super heady stuff.
Core 8 Gaming.
Yeah, right. They did a whole video about how getting your ass beat is good for you.
It's
because
good for you.
learn.
Yeah.
Right, like it feels terrible, but then you're like, oh shit, like I never thought about that strategy, that loadout, or that way to play, this technique, putting those things together.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, you absolutely right. You got to own real estate in their head. Once you get inside someone's head, it's why I used to love proximity chat, right? Like, just because there's that moment where like you can both hear each other and like you know that you just destroyed that person. You just start to pick them apart a little bit. It's not on a spike, a little bit, in the moment probably. But you're doing what you need to do to win the game. You want to be the best player you can in that moment. And so like, there's a point in time where you have to just kind of put that other player's feelings aside for the better of yourself or your team or your ability to win. You can still be human, right? But I don't know, just the kind of like pussyfooting around about people and trying to be light and airy about how games are played is a little much for me.
Yep. And and I think especially in like a professional sport, these are your colleagues too, right? Like when the jersey comes off, you're members of the same organization, and I think about my own athletic career, particularly in wrestling. There's one kid from Episcopal Academy who I could and I don't get me wrong, I was not undefeated my senior year, and I lost plenty of matches, and the matches I lost to guys who smoked me and were better than me, and then thankfully I had a lot of opportunities to split matches with some decent guys who were at my level. But there was one guy from Episcopal who I just could not put away at all. And I made a lot of poor choices and it got in my head. And it was always a decision. I never lost him by anything more than 2 points. And I lost him 3 times my senior year. And it was fucking aggravating. And I had my moments and I went to my corner and I did my thing. But when we were at tournaments, we looked for each other at the bracket. We were at each other's corners. We dapped each other. And we weren't friends. It was just like, this is my rival. He makes me better. This is my rival. He pushes me. And now as a coach, it's funny, a lot of guys from my era, right, sports breed coaches. And they're guys from my era. There's he's no longer there, but Danny Horowitz was one of the guys I lost to my senior year. and Danny's a great assistant coach for Friends Central, which is like our big rival program, and it's all love. It's funny because like we'll go to tournaments and like our guys will cheer for their guys will cheer for our guys, because that's what it is, right? Like rivalry breeds camaraderie, and that's good for you, I think, as a person. And I think that we just have to recognize that there are rules in sport. They're not entitlements. There are no entitlements. You don't get to have entitlements in sport. And I will never forget this. I don't think I'm a naturally pugnacious person. And especially when I'm representing my employer, I try to put my best foot forward. And I was coaching a dual meet against, a rival school, and on paper it looked close. In reality, choked them out. Not even close. And part of it was we lucked out with sort of how they tried to, and it's the strategy, right? They tried to predict our lineup, and basically the matchups we gave them favored us. And some of our guys came in clutch, winning matches that maybe on paper it looked like a 50-50 toss-up. But in one match, it was our stud against their stud. And they had never seen each other at tournaments. They hadn't seen each other at tournaments. It was one of those things where like they were on opposite sides of the bracket or the same side of the bracket, and one of them fell out earlier or whatever. So they never saw each other. But they were always neck and neck, finishing, similarly. And we knew that was going to be like the premier matchup of that duel. And our guy was our captain, and their guy was their captain. He showed up with a boot though, like a full leg or a brace. Sorry, you can't wrestle in the boot. Full brace, and it's his lead leg. So we wrestle. We wrestle the match. If you made weight and you present at the table, everyone involved is assuming that you are prepared to compete.
Yep.
Period. It's a combat sport. You can't make weight and you're injured, don't step up. Right? If you're too injured to compete, it is incumbent upon your coach to not present you in that match. My kid's going out there hungry, ready to swim. Great match, we lose. Decision, and it was tight. I mean, it was stellar. I think it was and the kid I'm talking about, Jack Shea. I think it was one of his best matches all year because he's just one of those gritty kids who loves challenge, loves adversity, and always looks to see like, what can I grow? What can I build? How does this loss make me better for the next one? But he loses. Just an awesome match. And so it's in the tournament. We're packing up, and a parent, an adult, comes over and he says something like, "Hey, are you the coach for the school?" I said, "Yeah, I'm one of them. What's up? How can I help you?" And it was our tournament, so I'm thinking that he's looking for directions or trying to get to a parking lot or something. He's like, "So it looked to me like you were telling your guy to shoot," and he was the kid's parent, to shoot on my guy's leg. And I'm like, "Well, I was telling my guy to shoot because this is wrestling and that is how you score points."
Yep.
And I wasn't quite that snarky. He was like, "No, you were telling him to target his injured leg." And I'm like, "Sir, I have never, would never tell somebody to target an injury." And I can tell you that because I'm a product of this program. It's just not how we do business here. I don't know what you heard or what you think you heard, but that simply did not happen. And he's like, "Well, no, you told him to target the leg." And I'm like, "Sir, I really don't know what to tell you." But this ultimately, to wrap this up, this guy's point was like, your guy should not have targeted my guy's leg. One, we never told him to target. We never told him to say, "Hey, rip his leg off." We told him to wrestle. If you are presenting your lead leg and it is your injured leg, that is the easiest leg to attack.
Yep.
What is my guy supposed to do? Look for more challenging shots? No. If you made weight and you presented at the table, you're telling everyone at that mat you are ready to roll. Your kid's too banged up? That's on you. Don't have him weigh in.
I agree.
And so your kid's not entitled to some kind of latitude to saying this limb is off limits in a wrestling contest. And so I think that's ultimately it. There's no entitlements in sports. You have rules. You have rules, and what you do falls within the parameters of those rules. But you're not entitled to things. And I think that's part of. I guess that's part of what makes me bristle with this situation. That pitcher feeling like he's entitled to throw a strike. and have it be gravy. It's bullshit.